Today I want to tell you about the biggest gold mining fraud ever. Now, the gold mining industry, I hate to admit, has had more than its share of hucksters and con men and frauds, but this is the one that takes the cake. It's the most extreme, biggest one ever. A few made millions, but a whole lot lost their shirts, including a lot of institutional public investment stuff, like retirement funds that invest money for people's retirement. It was an elaborate and intentional fraud, and in the end, no one was punished or even went to jail. It was so extreme that even Hollywood made a movie about it that came out. It starred Matthew McConaughey. But I'll tell you the real story of what happened, not the Hollywood version. Don't believe me that this was the biggest gold mining fraud ever? Well, let me show you a chart to prove it.
Here's a stock chart between 1990 and 1997 for Bre-X minerals. In the early 90s, it was sold as a penny stock, and just to make a point, this chart is corrected for a 10-to-1 stock split that they had in 96. So the equivalent price that the stock was originally sold for was 3 cents a share. And then it rode all the way up to a high of what would be $28, more than $28 a share. That's a huge increase, and most of 1,000 to 1. And that's what people hope for with these kinds of stocks. It got way up there. It was an amazing find. It was the darling of the stock market. Institutional investors, even people that don't take risks in these sorts of things, got into this stock. And big mining companies were fooled too. They were all interested. But then when it came out, the facts started coming out, the stock just dropped like a rock. And there's a little upsy daisy there where it went down to 2 and back up to 4. But as soon as the whole facts came out, it basically went to 0, and it was delisted. And everybody who held stock, whatever money they had invested, was gone because it was all fraud. At its peak, it was worth over $5 billion US. Yup, $1 billion.
Back in 1989, a Canadian businessman by the name of David Walsh founded a small gold mining exploration company by the name of Bre-X Minerals. Initially, this stock didn't do a whole lot, and it kind of languished on the market. But David Walsh hired a guy named John Felderhoff to be the exploration geologist for the company, to be in charge of exploration. And Felderhoff recommended to him a property in Indonesia that, had the right kind of geology, and, there were artisanal small-scale miners mining placer gold in the area. And so it looked to be a good risk to explore and maybe find a nice deposit. The property was on the banks of what was called the Busang River in Indonesia. And the company began a gold exploration program there. And in order to get the company going, Mr. Felderhoff was not a field geologist. He stayed in the company offices in Canada. They hired a Filipino geologist by the name of Michael de Guzman to be the field person and run up the project and make sure that the holes got drilled in the right places and the samples were taken for proper assay and handle all the field type stuff that went on out at the property in Indonesia. Now, the initial drill results out at the Busang property kind of came in disappointing. Like there just wasn't, much gold there, maybe just traces. And they were considering dropping the property and, getting another place, giving up, basically calling it quits. And the geologist, Michael de Guzman, pleaded with them, "Oh, please drill some more holes. This property has good potential." And he convinced the management that, we should at least put in some more money, before we give up, drill some more holes, and make sure there's not something there that we've missed. Well, surprise, surprise, the next set of holes came in super rich. There was lots of gold there, and everybody was excited because they'd really hit a couple of good holes that indicated maybe there was something really great there. And because of that, the exploration continued. Hey, I'm Chris Ralph, the professional prospector, and today we're taking a look at the biggest gold mining fraud of all time, and how this little company called Bre-X, a penny stock on the Toronto Stock Exchange, went from being, like I say, this stock worth a few cents to ultimately the highest share price was $286 and being worth a total of about $5 billion US. And then it went from $5 billion back down to zero. Now the company, when they had these first few successful holes, they announced that this is how the mining industry, how the exploration industry works. You know, that they have some successful holes, they'll be sure and let people know that they're making some good finds. And this company did just exactly that. And the stock began to move up. Not crazy at first, but, you know, it was an indication of a potential good find. And so there was some movement up in the stock, and it, you know, got up to a buck or two a share. But as they continued to drill, the positive drill results just kept coming in. And soon it seemed like there was definitely enough ore at Busang, enough high-grade gold for them to, you know, have a commercial mining operation. You know, you can find a little bit of gold, even if it's fairly high grade, and it may not be enough to justify a commercial operation, but it started to seem like as they continued to get really good drill holes out there at the Busang property, that this was going to be a significant gold mine. They actually had someone take their drill results and estimate total gold reserve that they found, and the initial gold estimates were about 8 million ounces of gold, which, hey, that's pretty darn good. That certainly is enough in most cases, especially with higher grade ore, to justify a commercial operation. The company continued to drill and continued to get more great results, and, you know, they had a really impressive find. By 1995, it was reported that their new estimate of reserves was now up to 10 million ounces. And they said that the property had the potential for 30 million ounces. This made Busang really a world-class discovery. Not just enough to justify a single mine, but enough to really play out on the world gold mining stage. And at that time, the stock really began to take off. About this same time, Mr. de Guzman, Mr. Felderhoff, and Mr. Walsh, the founder, the corporate geologist, and the field geologist, decided to sell some of their options. This is typically one of the things, the incentives that exploration mining company folks get, is these options to purchase shares at a fixed price. Because the price had gone up so much, their options were worth a lot of money, and at this time the three guys sold a bunch of their options, and the total income from that was around $100 million. But the great results just kept on coming in, and by 1996 the reserve estimate for Busang was raised to 60 million ounces, making Busang the biggest gold discovery in decades. There was no doubt that there would be a big commercial operation here, and it would be one of the world's big producers of gold. And major mining companies, because, you know, these little exploration companies, they're really not set up to operate a big mine. Normally what happens is these little companies will make a discovery, and they'll line out discovery and find, you know, really what the reserve is, and if they make a really good discovery, they'll bring in a larger mining company to actually do the actual mining of the property. The larger mining company has more resources, it has more experience, it's done this kind of thing before, and so partnering with one of these big companies is really the way it's done in the industry. And so at this time, a lot of these big companies, big name companies, were really starting to take a serious interest in the Busang property. The stock market responded by bidding up the price of Bre-X up to amazing heights. Now the stock split when it was at about its highest at like 280. They did a split of 10 to 1. So a price of $280 because you'd get 10 shares became $28, but you'd have, if you had bought at 280, you now had 10 times as many shares at 28. So it doesn't reduce the value. It just makes it more affordable. How many people can come in and buy, a couple thousand shares of a $280 stock? By reducing it down to 28, then people could come in and buy 100 shares or maybe even 1,000 shares at those kinds of prices. It was easier. It makes it easier for the market to handle the share price. And at this time, banks and, like I say, the Canadian public sector, retirement funds, institutional investors, and lots of people, even big gold mining companies. There were big gold mining companies that were investing in Bre-X because it was such a sure thing. It was such a big find. It was such big news. It was really clearly that there had been a giant discovery of gold here. It was clear to investors that there was money to be made in Bre-X stock. And it was this time that the stock started to be in the media all over the place. Stockbrokers everywhere started recommending it to their clients. And this is what investing in mining exploration companies is all about. Taking a stock that sells for pennies and riding it up to hundreds of dollars a share. This is what everybody who invests in exploration companies hopes for. And Bre-X became the darling of the market. Now, this is about the time when I first, because I remember hearing about it. I'm in the industry, and I heard about Bre-X and this amazing find that they'd made in Indonesia at the Busang property, and it was just, it was amazing. But at that time I had little kids at home, and I didn't have money for investing. I was just trying to keep my head above water, feeding the family, keeping everybody happy, and paying all the whatever doctor bills, bills for repairing the car and the house and whatever else. So I didn't have money to invest in something like this, and I guess it's a good thing that I didn't, because I never invested in something like this. But the word got out in all the media, the newspapers. I still have an article that talks about, boy, what a great moneymaker this company is, and how the people who got in early have just made fistfuls of money, and it's just a really great stock. And everybody knew what a great deal Bre-X was and what a great discovery they'd made at Busang in Indonesia. About this same time, the Indonesian government began to take a real big interest in this because it was such a big deal. Their government is maybe a little bit questionable, and they figured that if anybody was going to be making big money off of it, they were going to be right in there making big money themselves. And so they actually went out and revoked Bre-X's permits to do exploration on the property. Now, everybody knew that this was a big find and a big deal, and there was in the interest of all parties to resolve something. The stock went down a little bit in price, but like I say, everybody knew that it was in the best interest of everyone to resolve this disagreement and get back to work on exploring and developing the property. At the same time, a number of mining companies were competing openly to get access to the property, basically to be the mine operator, like I talked about before, that these little companies, they're not really set up to operate and conduct a big mining operation. So the big mining companies were competing to get in there and be the operator that made that share of money off the property. And about this time, a deal was negotiated between the Indonesian government and Bre-X and a company called Freeport-McMoRan, which is a big mining company active here in the U.S., and they negotiated a deal that gave the Indonesian government 40%, Bre-X 45%, and Freeport got 15% for being operator. And once that deal was negotiated, approval to go out and do more exploration was issued. And like I say, everybody knew that it was in the best interests of everyone to move forward with this big discovery. Let's take a look at some of the folks from Bre-X who were involved in this operation and talk a little bit about them.
So the guy on the left is David Walsh. He's the Canadian businessman that founded Bre-X and did the initial public stock offering and got the company going. He had experience in mining and oil, and he's about 50 years old when this picture was taken. The gentleman on the right is John Felderhoff. He's the corporate geologist who recommended Busang, and he's got pictures of the ore deposit and where they intercepted really high-grade ore showing on the board in the background. And here is the geology crew out on site in the jungle at Busang. On the left is site manager Jerome Alto, and then in the second from the left is Mr. Felderhofer, who I showed in the previous picture. And then third from the left is Michael de Guzman, who is the person of interest in this situation. And then on the right is Cesar Puspos, another geologist. And in these days, the company had money and they built a lovely facility in the jungle. They cleared out space and put in lawn and even, put their name, Bre-X Minerals. They just had a real nice facility for working on the property here. But 25 years later, since this has happened, the jungle has reclaimed this site, and it supposedly as you can hardly find these buildings because it's so overgrown by the jungle. The jungle reclaims its own.
The final estimate that was made before Freeport arrived on site was that the resource was now up to 71 million ounces. That's a tremendous amount of gold. And at the time, John Felderhoff, the company corporate geologist, in an interview with Fortune magazine, told them that he thought the potential gold that the site might have, the maximum that we might end up with, might be as much as 200 million ounces. And that's just a huge, huge amount, and really would have made Busang among the biggest gold resources on planet Earth. Not number one, not number two, but it would be up there among the handful of largest gold deposits on Earth. Mysteriously, though, about this time, there was a fire in the offices of Bre-X Minerals at the site at Busang, and strangely, the vast majority of the assay results that had shown the deposit to be super rich were burned and lost. This was kind of maybe the very first indication that there was something wrong. Shortly afterwards, Freeport arrived on site and began doing what they call twin test holes. And this is a kind of a due diligence thing where Freeport came in just to check the results of that Bre-X had received before they invested huge, vast sums, because to start a mine, especially in a jungle like that, because this is a very remote location in Indonesia, to start a big, large-scale mine there would have required an investment of hundreds of millions of dollars. So before they went forward with that kind of investment, they want to go out and just double-check and make sure that the Bre-X holds, that they confirm the same kinds of numbers that Bre-X was getting. So they would go, and maybe where Bre-X had a hole, they would go 10 feet away or something like that and drill another hole, just checking to see that they got pretty much the same kinds of results that Bre-X had received in their hole. It allows the discovery and the numbers that they were using for their resource estimate to be verified and checked and be known to be true. Freeport started doing their own due diligence. But the funny thing is, instead of finding gobs of super rich multi-ounce gold ore that Bre-X had supposedly found and had been announcing to the world, instead they were just finding little traces of gold, and nothing of any significance, not even any good ore, even smaller amounts of ore. They were just finding minuscule amounts, trace amounts of gold. So while Freeport was out there testing on the property and, trying to verify or see what Bre-X had done, de Guzman, the chief geologist for the field, was in Toronto partying it up. He was heading every night to one of the local strip clubs and just having a grand old time. But he got word of the results that Freeport was getting, and within days, de Guzman was on his way back to Indonesia because Freeport wanted to know what in the world was going on, because they weren't getting any results that looked anything even remotely like the results that Bre-X had got. They wanted answers from de Guzman, but de Guzman would never make it back to the Busang property. On March 18, 1997, de Guzman arrived in Balikpapan, where a helicopter was set up to take him out to the mining property at Busang the next morning. That night he went to a karaoke restaurant and belted out a few tunes, including, they say, he sang My Way by Paul Anka, a song made famous by Frank Sinatra. According to the people who were with him, he appeared to be in good spirits, and the next morning, de Guzman boarded a helicopter bound for the Busang property to have basically his showdown with the Freeport mining executives. Roughly about 20 minutes into the flight, pilot Eddie Tosorno heard a bang and felt the chopper kind of list one way and then the other, and he turned around to look behind him and see what was happening, and de Guzman was gone, and the door was open. When he landed in the back of the plane in an envelope, the police found 2 copies of a suicide note from de Guzman. The scam unraveled rapidly beginning in March 1997, after it was made public that de Guzman had fallen to his death from a helicopter over the Indonesian jungle. Bre-X started to dip on the news, and the company quickly filed for bankruptcy. In the process, it wiped out billions of dollars of investment, including, like I say, for institutional investors, banks, and other big investors, but also for small operators and individuals who all got caught up in the greedy scramble for what seemed like easy money. A week after de Guzman's death, on March 26, 1997, Freeport announced its own due diligence core samples, and that its results showed insignificant amounts of gold at the Busang property. A frenzied sell-off, whatever hadn't sold off before, sold off even further and even more, and the Bre-X shares just dropped like a rock. An independent third-party company was brought in to analyze the samples and look at the materials and try and figure out what happened, and their results showed that the samples had been salted. The early samples were salted with 14 karat gold, thought to be from de Guzman's wedding ring, and then later from just placer samples that had been from the miners that were operating, the artisanal miners that were operating nearby. And the report said that it was almost certain that it was Michael de Guzman who had been salting the samples. Bre-X shares were halted from all stock exchanges in May of 1997. But by then, the value was essentially zero. Although the Bre-X fraud was huge in its scope, it was not terribly sophisticated. De Guzman had taken the core samples from the ground, and after the samples were crushed and bagged, de Guzman made it his thing that he had to spend a little bit of time going over them and checking them, and when he had some alone time with the samples, he would take, like I say, either shavings from 14 karat gold or a placer gold that he bought from the locals, and he would salt the samples and carefully weigh out the amounts in order to have amount of gold that's believable, not too huge, but still believable, good grade, but believable. And he would do that. And it turned out, after further investigation later, months afterwards, it was found out that de Guzman had been purchasing gold from the local placer miners, and that over the 2.5-year period, he had purchased more than $61,000 worth of gold from the local miners to use in salting the Bre-X samples. The strange death of de Guzman has spawned endless conspiracy theories. A body was found 4 days later in the jungle, more or less within the track that the helicopter had flown. But some of the reports are conflicting. One report says that the body was missing its hands and feet, that they'd been surgically removed. Yet the coroner's report said that the hands were so decomposed that he couldn't get fingerprints off of them, and in the same way that the face was decomposed and unrecognizable. A number of the reports say that the body was partially eaten by animals. No DNA samples were ever taken that could be checked against de Guzman's relatives to confirm whether or not it was him. According to another report, a body had gone missing from the morgue in the town from which the helicopter flew. The remains of de Guzman were found only about 400 feet from a logging road that went through the area. Nobody actually saw the body when they pulled it out, except for one of his geologist co-workers from Bre-X, and the geologist said that was de Guzman. One of the women that, because we'll talk about this in a minute, but one of 4 women that de Guzman had married, and they didn't know about each other, but one of the women who thought that she was his wife has been receiving payments, or has a couple of times received significant payments of cash mysteriously, and this is after de Guzman was long declared dead. In the Hollywood movie that they made about this, the de Guzman character lives and is some sort of criminal genius that has managed to disappear with his ill-got gains. And so that's what the Hollywood movie says, but of course Hollywood loves conspiracies because conspiracies sell tickets. A whole lot of sordid information came out about Guzman after his supposed death. He had married 4 women and fathered 9 children, and that the women and children were scattered across Southeast Asia. None of his 4 wives knew about the others, and he was basically a secret polygamist. He was diagnosed with hepatitis B a few months before his death, and hepatitis B is something that, not always, but is commonly transmitted sexually. But, and he was known to hang out in strip clubs and similar kinds of places, so who knows what other places he frequented. His other job, the last job he had before Bre-X, he was actually fired for embezzlement. He was taking company funds and using them to help support his wives and children. So he was very lucky to get that job at Bre-X. Usually when you're fired for embezzlement, the word goes out and you're never going to get hired for that kind of a position again. So because of his wives and kids, he had a desperate need to not be unemployed. And he needed the money, and he was lucky to get the job with Bre-X. So when the holes started coming in initially, then they were kind of disappointing. They really didn't have significant amounts of gold, maybe only just traces. He really needed to keep that job. And rather than trying to embezzle money, he basically took the samples and added a little bit of his own gold to them to make them look a lot better. I mean, after all, he was living the lie with 4 wives and families. What would one more lie be, just insulting the samples? No harm done, right? But as time went on, the Busang lie kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There was no easy way out for him. Plus, as the time went on, the Busang lie became really profitable. And, he had option shares and other, incentives, and he made a lot of money from that. He'd never had that kind of money in his life. And I'm sure that he liked having good money, and it made it so that he had more than plenty of money to buy up the $61,000 worth of placer gold from the local artisanal miners. And so he had plenty of gold with which to salt his samples. So the question remains, where is de Guzman? Where is he really? Now, most of his wives and his family are fully convinced that he died and that he's dead. The Indonesian police also are convinced he's dead. The coroner who examined the body was unable to really identify who he was, but said that the multiple broken bones that the body had were consistent with someone who had fallen from a great height. But I have special inside information. Yep, I know where de Guzman is. He's actually living in Las Vegas, Nevada. Surprised? He's sharing an apartment with Elvis and JFK. And they all three have secret wives and women that are after them, and I don't mean in a good way. And of course, the reason they're in Vegas is what everybody always knows, that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. The three of them often spend time hanging out with their good friend D.B. Cooper. And, if you believe that, then I have a very special bridge in Brooklyn that I want to sell you. Now, the truth is that de Guzman, I'm certain that he committed suicide. Nothing about de Guzman says that he was some kind of expert criminal mastermind who could, do this kind of stuff. He was just a perpetual liar that painted himself into a corner and got caught in his own web of lies and was so embarrassed by the lying that there was no way out for him, and he committed suicide. I mean, if he would have been that, criminal mastermind type, he could have easily taken care of it with no need to do some kind of phony suicide. He could have, when he was in Canada, in the weeks and months before the time that Freeport went out there, he must have known that when Freeport drilled it, what results Freeport would get. And so, he could have organized all his finances and converted as much money as he could to cash and gold, diamonds, other things that he could easily carry with him. And he could have acquired false passports and false identification, could have changed his appearance, bought new clothes, and before he got summoned back to Indonesia, he would have just disappeared. But there would have been forensic evidence that he organized his finances and did some of that stuff to disappear, and there's no evidence of that. And so, if he would have wanted to do that kind of stuff, the suicide thing was completely unnecessary. And so I think that everything about this guy just says he was a perpetual liar and lied so many times and was so embarrassed by the results of his lies that he took his own life rather than face the music. So what happened to the rest of the Bre-X folks? The geology associates that he had out on the property, a number of them were accused by various investigators of assisting de Guzman in his salting efforts, but none of them were ever charged with anything. The founder of the company, David Walsh, took his piles of money, and the year after the big scandal was over, he moved to Bermuda. In his new home in Nassau. After a few months, some mass burglars came in, tied him up, and threatened to shoot him if they didn't give them all of his money. The incident was resolved peacefully, but a couple of 3 weeks later, in early June of 1998, Walsh died of a brain aneurysm very suddenly. And he wasn't that old. He was maybe in his mid-40s, so he was a young guy to be dying, but that's what happened to him. So then the only person left that was really part of the whole thing was Mr. Felderhoff, and he was charged in 1999 with illegal insider trading. There were delays in the trial and various things happened, but eventually he was acquitted of all charges. So in the end, no one paid any price, unless you consider de Guzman's suicide as the price. It could be considered that way. But no one was charged with anything, and the people who made money kept their money. And it was just an unfortunate circumstance that Mr. Walsh died of a brain aneurysm. And in the end, no one was convicted of anything over this whole gigantic fraud. The Bre-X mining scandal convinced the Canadians that they really needed to much more closely regulate the professional geology profession, and also to regulate mining exploration companies that do this kind of work. The securities regulation called National Instrument 43-101 was created in the wake of the Bre-X scandal to protect investors from, scandalous fraud and sorts of thing. And, almost all the mining companies, even ones that aren't centered in Canada, still organize their efforts to show that they're in compliance with this. So what was the geology there at Busang that fooled so many, even big mining companies, into thinking, God, there really must be a big discovery here? There is gold in the area, and the region is one of intrusion-related and epithermal-type deposits. A geology professor was invited to go there and take samples of his own only about a month before the whole Busang thing unraveled. And the information he got tells us a lot about this infamous deposit that really never was. Let's take a look at some maps and talk about the geology of the area and examine it further.
So the question is, where in the world is the Busang property? Well, it's in Indonesia, which is shown here, on an island known to most of the world as Borneo. It's heavily jungled and remote and not an easy to get to site. And that's why they needed to use helicopters to get in there. As I mentioned, there are locals doing gold mining there, both hard rock and placer. In this particular picture, the guy with the ball cap is adding mercury into an amalgamation drum. They'll reseal it and then let the drum spin for a few hours and capture all the gold. This guy is doing the next step in the process. He's basically washing the concentrates off. The bucket that he has that he's working on will have the mercury in the bottom of it, and then it's going into another drum just as a catch basin in case he loses something. But he's working with mercury with his bare hands. Here's the geology of the island of Borneo. And, it does have gold deposits, not big ones. It is an area with intrusive granitic type rocks and also volcanic rocks. The property for Busang sits on sort of the eastern side of the island in an area where volcanic rocks come close to other rocks, and there's significant alteration there. And so, there's signs that could indicate potential there, but obviously when they drilled it, they didn't really find anything.
Now, finding real gold, not the fake stuff, is a skill, and what you know about prospecting and about geology and mining makes all the difference in the world. If you want to find your own gold, I've written a book to help you. It's a book to impart to you the skills and knowledge that I've gained in decades of prospecting, including my degree in mine engineering. If you want to learn more about finding your own gold, check out this book. It's called Fistful of Gold, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my book right now.
So this is my book, Fistful of Gold. You can see it's an encyclopedia distilling down my 45 plus years of prospecting experience plus my degree into the parts that you need to know. I spent most of 10 years writing this. It was not just a simple effort that, I sat down and wrote it. You can see it's like 250,000 words. It's not something you're going to read through in a day or maybe even a week or more. But it's got a lot of information and reference material that you can come back to. You can read it once and read it again and get more out of it because there's just that much depth of material in this. I wrote this book because I want you to have the skills to go out and find fistfuls of gold for yourself. And if you have the skills and know what you're doing and get out in the field and make a real effort, you can find significant gold. It's not easy. I'm not going to tell you that because, gold, it wouldn't be, close to $2,000 an ounce, which is what it is right now. It wouldn't be so expensive if it was easy to find. It's not easy. You just can't walk out into an old gold field and start picking up nuggets. if the gold was easy to see and find, the old timers would have picked it up and taken it themselves. So you got to have skill. You got to know what you're doing. You got to be able to master what it takes to find gold, and you've got to have the persistence and put in the effort to find the material, to find the gold or diamonds or gemstones that you're looking for. Now, book has geology, it has facts about gold, it has stuff about diamonds and platinum, but it's mostly about gold deposits, how gold deposits form, how placer and nuggets form, all the questions you probably wanted to ask. The book is available on Amazon, and I'll put a link to it in the description below, but you can look up on Amazon, Fistful of Gold, and by Chris Ralph, and find this book. Now, the book, if you look on it, it has a very high rating. It has like a 4.7 or 4.8 out of 5, which is really high. I mean, it's hard to please everybody, but I'm close to a 5 out of 5, not far from it, right? So it's been out. I've sold more than 15,000 copies of this book, and I've had tremendous response, tremendous positive response by the people who buy it. And I think if you buy it, you'll be just as happy with it. Now, in addition to my book, I also have a website that I do, and I'll tell you a little bit more about my website and show you some images from the website right now.
Now, my website is nevadaoutbackgems.com, and I'll put a link to the prospecting page, this prospecting encyclopedia page, down in the description below, but you can find it at Nevada Outback Gems. I sell some jewelry, turquoise, other gemstones there. I don't always keep the inventory perfectly up to date, so if you're interested in anything you see, do contact me first before trying to send me money or anything, because I want you to be able to get what you order. But the website has lots of different stories, old adventures, even some stories, true stories from the old-time miners of the 1800s. So I think it's something you'll find interesting.
The other thing I want to go back to is that all my comments, I want you guys to ask questions on the comments for my videos. I answer 100% of the comments that are made on my videos. Now, sometimes if somebody just says, "Hey, great video, I really enjoyed it," the comment may just be, "Well, I'm really glad you liked it," or if it's a simple question. And sometimes I get people who ask me questions. I would take a book to answer that question, and I recommend that they just buy the book. But I answer all my questions. I try to help people as much as I can. I'm here to help you. So if you're interested in gaining the skills, if you're interested in knowing what you need to know to be successful, follow along with me. Subscribe to my channel, hit the bell so that they'll let you know when I come out with new videos, and I try to do that pretty much every Saturday morning. And you'll enjoy with me, you'll come along with me, we'll have an adventure together, and we will find some nice gold and see what it's really like getting out in the woods, or the deserts, or the mountains, wherever we land, wherever the gold is, wherever the diamonds are, wherever the platinum is. Come along, we'll have some fun. And I'll see you real soon on the next video.